My $50,000 ring is charity to my fiancé's family, who claim it would take 10 years of my useless job to earn. They toast his generosity. Unaware the conglomerate they cling to has been mine for 5 years. Tonight, they demand a prenup, but tomorrow, the only thing I will sign is their termination papers. Pour a drink and listen to how I taught these arrogant fools the most expensive lesson of their lives. My name is Layla Foxworth, and as I stood on the manicured lawn of the Thorne estate in the Hamptons, I felt less like a guest and more like a specimen under a microscope. The air smelled of sea salt hydrangeas and the specific metallic tang of old money that was terrified of becoming new poverty. It was the kind of evening that photographed perfectly for the society pages, but felt suffocating to live through. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, a stark contrast to the darkness that was currently swirling in my mind. This party was ostensibly a celebration of my fiancé Julian's promotion to regional executive director at Omnicore Systems. In reality, it was a coronation for a prince who had not earned his crown. I smoothed the fabric of my dress down my thighs. It was a simple slate gray slip dress made of high-quality silk, but it lacked the flashy logos or the aggressive sequins that seemed to be the uniform for the women in Julian's circle. I had bought it with my own money from my salary, which the Thorne family assumed was barely enough to cover my grocery bills. Victoria Thorne. Julian's mother descended upon me like a bird of prey spotting a field mouse. She was wearing a crimson gown that cost more than most people's cars, holding a flute of champagne with a grip that turned her knuckles white. Her face was pulled tight by the best surgeons in Manhattan, but her eyes remained ancient and calculating. She stopped 2 feet from me, looking me up and down with a performative frown. "Oh, Layla, there you are," she said, and her voice carried that unique frequency of high society politeness that is actually a razor blade wrapped in silk. "I was worried you had gotten lost on the way from the train station. You know the service entrance can be tricky to find." I had driven here in my own car, a reliable sedan, that I parked 3 blocks away to avoid their sneers, but I simply smiled. "I found my way just fine, Victoria. The house looks beautiful." "It is a breathless amount of work," she sighed, gesturing vaguely at the catering staff moving like ghosts through the crowd. Then her eyes snapped back to my dress. "And look at you. So brave, to wear something so plain to an event like this. It is quaint, really. It reminds me of the things my housekeeper wears to church on Sundays. Very budget-conscious." I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, but I forced it down into the cold pit of my stomach where I kept all my secrets. "I prefer minimalism," I replied evenly. "Of course you do, dear," she said, patting my arm with a pity that felt like a slap. "We all have to live within our means, do we not, even if those means are rather limited." Before I could respond, Julian appeared at my side. He looked every inch the golden boy of the corporate world in his bespoke tuxedo, his hair perfectly coiffed, his smile dazzling and entirely empty. He wrapped an arm around my waist, but it did not feel like an embrace. It felt like ownership. It was the way a man holds a new watch or a leased luxury car. "Mother play nice," Julian said, though his tone suggested he enjoyed the sport. He turned me toward a group of men standing nearby holding tumblers of amber liquid. "Gentlemen, come meet the lucky lady. This is Layla." The men turned. I recognized them immediately. They were senior partners and investors in Omnicore. I knew their names, their salaries, and their darkest HR complaints because I had personally reviewed their files in my digital vault. But to them, I was nobody. "Charmed," said a man named Richard, a vice president who had billed the company for 3 escorts in Las Vegas last month under the guise of client entertainment. "So Layla Julian tells us you are in the tech sector as well." I opened my mouth to speak, to say that I was not just in the sector, but that I was the architect of the very infrastructure they stood upon. But Julian cut me off, his hand tightening on my waist. "Oh, I would not call it the tech sector, Richard." Julian laughed, a sound that grated against my nerves. "Layla is a freelance data archivist. She organizes files for small businesses. You know, scanning invoices, typing numbers into spreadsheets, that sort of thing. It keeps her busy." The men chuckled a low, rumbling sound of shared superiority. Data entry essentially, Richard said, nodding with mock seriousness. Well, someone has to do the grunt work, right? It is good, honest labor. Exactly. Julian beamed, looking down at me with a condescending fondness. I keep telling her she does not need to work so hard for such little pay, especially now that we are getting married. I am happy to be the provider, but she likes her little projects. It makes her feel independent. My little projects involved managing a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, overseeing logistics for 40 countries, and developing artificial intelligence that was currently 2 years ahead of the market, but I simply lowered my eyes, playing the role they had written for me. It pays the bills, I said softly. Barely, Julian joked, and the group erupted in laughter again. I needed to get away from them before I said something that would ruin the trap I had spent 5 years setting. I excused myself, murmuring something about needing a fresh drink. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back, judging the cost of my shoes and the set of my shoulders. I made my way toward the bar, but my path was blocked by Bella, Julian's younger sister. She was 22 years old and had never worked a day in her life unless you counted posting photos of her brunch on social media as labor. She was holding a large glass of red wine and swaying slightly, her eyes bright with malice. Layla, she slurred a little, blocking my path. I cannot believe you actually showed up. I bet Julian $50 you would lose your nerve. Why would I do that, Bella? I asked, keeping my distance. Because you do not fit here, she said, stepping closer. Look around. These are important people, people who matter. You are just background noise. Julian is only marrying you because he thinks he can mold you, like a stray dog he picked up at the shelter. Excuse me, I said, stepping to the side. Oops, Bella said flatly. With a flick of her wrist that was as calculated as a sniper's shot, she tilted her glass. The dark red liquid splashed across the front of my gray silk dress, soaking into the fabric, instantly looking like a fresh wound. The cold seeped through to my skin. Bella covered her mouth with a hand that held a diamond ring worth more than my car. Oh my God, I am so clumsy. I am so sorry, Layla. But honestly, that dress was tragic anyway. I probably did you a favor. Heads turned. I saw Victoria watching from across the terrace, a smirk playing on her lips. Julian glanced over, saw the stain, and simply rolled his eyes, turning back to his conversation. He was not coming to save me. He never would. It is fine, I said, my voice ice cold. Accidents happen. Go clean yourself up, Bella sneered. Use the servant's bathroom off the kitchen. It is more your speed. I did not go to the kitchen. I walked with my head high through the crowd, the wine stain a mark of shame they tried to project onto me, but I wore it like war paint. I slipped into the library, a room usually empty during these parties because the Thorne family did not read. I moved toward the heavy oak door of the private powder room tucked in the corner, but stopped when I heard voices coming from the adjacent study. The door was cracked open an inch. I recognized Julian's voice. He was in there with Richard and his father, Arthur Thorne. The board is a joke, Arthur was saying, his voice thick with scotch. We have them eating out of our hands. This phantom owner, this chairman, nobody has ever seen. He is probably dead or senile. The proxy votes always go through that law firm. Omnicore is ripe for the taking, Julian added. Once I solidify my position as regional director, I will have access to the core logistical data. We can start funneling the high-value contracts to the new shell company we set up. By the time the board realizes the revenue is bleeding out, we will own the infrastructure. And your girl? Richard asked. The archivist. She will not be a problem. Layla, Julian scoffed. Please, she does not know the difference between a balance sheet and a grocery list. I have her completely fooled. She thinks I am the most honest man on earth. Once we are married, she will be too busy playing house to notice anything. And if she does, she has no resources to fight me. I am her entire world. I stood frozen in the shadows, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, hard fury. They were not just arrogant, they were thieves. They were planning to gut my company, the company I had built from the ground up, the company that was my life's work. I slipped into the powder room and locked the door. My hands were trembling, but I forced them to be steady. I pulled my phone from my clutch. There was a secure notification from Elias, my chief of staff, and the only person at Omnicorp who knew my face. Subject: financial irregularities. Urgent. We traced the funding for the Hamptons event tonight. It was not paid for by the Thorne Family Trust. The entire invoice, $150,000, was charged to the Omnicorp logistics and training budget. They categorized it as a team-building seminar. Also, Julian authorized a transfer of $200,000 to a personal offshore account yesterday. We have the digital paper trail. I stared at the screen. $150,000 of my money to pay for the champagne they were drinking to mock me. $200,000 stolen while he lectured me about my entry-level salary. I looked at myself in the mirror. The red wine stain on my chest looked like blood. My eyes stared back, dark and dangerous. For years I had played the role of the quiet, supportive partner because I wanted to believe Julian was different. I wanted to be loved for myself, not for my title or my billions. But the man I thought I loved did not exist. There was only this parasite, this smiling thief. I washed my hands, watching the water turn pink from the wine residue. I did not try to scrub the stain out of the dress. I would wear it. I would let it be a reminder of exactly who they were. When I returned to the terrace, the party was in full swing. Julian was standing on a raised platform near the pool holding a microphone. The spotlight hit him, making him look like a golden idol. "Attention, everyone!" he boomed, his charisma turned up to full volume. "I want to propose a toast." The crowd quieted. I stood at the back near a marble pillar, half in shadow. "To family," Julian said, raising his glass. "To success. And to my beautiful fiancée, Layla, wherever she is hiding." He scanned the crowd until he found me. He did not cringe at the stain on my dress. He smiled a smile that said, "Look how magnanimous I am to love this mess." "Layla, come out here," he beckoned. I stepped forward slightly. "You know, folks, people ask me why I chose Layla. She is not a business shark like us. She is simple. She is kind. And honestly, it is refreshing to come home to someone who does not ask complicated questions. My wife does not need to be smart. She just needs to be mine. She just needs to be obedient." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Polite, knowing laughter. The men nodded in agreement. The women smiled tight smiles. "To Layla," Julian finished, "and to her little job that keeps her out of trouble. May she always know her place." "To Layla," the crowd echoed. I raised my empty hand, miming a toast. My place. I thought, you have no idea where my place is, Julian. My place is at the head of the table you are begging to sit at. The patience I had practiced for years was dissolving. In its place was the cold calculation of a hunter. I was no longer the prey. I was the trap, and they had just walked right into the center of the mechanism. As the toast ended and the jazz band struck up a tune, Victoria Thorne materialized beside me again. She smelled of expensive perfume and rot. "That was a lovely speech Julian gave," she said, swirling her drink. "He is so protective of you. It is charming, really." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "But let us be realistic, dear. Once you are married, this little hobby of yours, this data entry business, it has to go. You will be a thorn. It is embarrassing for Julian to have a wife who works for scraps. It looks desperate. You need to focus on serving your husband and running his household. That is the only job you are qualified for." I looked at her, at the layers of makeup hiding the cruelty, and I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn all night. "You think my job is useless, Victoria?" I asked softly. "I think it is a waste of time," she snapped. "And I think you should be grateful we are willing to overlook your lack of pedigree. Quit the job, Layla. Do not make us force you." "I will think about it," I said. "I have a lot of paperwork to finish tomorrow morning. Big decisions to make." "Good," she said, satisfied that she had bullied me into submission. "Make sure you make the right choice." I watched her walk away to join her husband and son. They stood together, a triumvirate of greed, laughing at a joke I could only assume was at my expense. The wind coming off the ocean turned colder, but I did not shiver. I reached into my clutch and touched the cool metal of my phone. Tomorrow morning was the board meeting. Tomorrow morning was the signing of the prenup. They wanted me to quit my job. I almost laughed out loud. Oh, I would quit my job as the freelance data archivist, and I would resume my real job, the executioner. I took one last look at the party, at the $50 bottles of wine paid for with my stolen money, at the people who looked at me and saw nothing. Enjoy the night, I thought as I turned toward the exit. It is the last one you will ever afford. I left the Hamptons estate with the taste of ash and expensive champagne lingering in my throat. The drive back to the city was a blur of highway lights and cold determination. When I finally unlocked the door to the apartment Julian and I shared, the silence that greeted me was heavy. It was a spacious penthouse overlooking the park, a property Julian boasted about paying for. In truth, the lease was under one of my shell companies, and his monthly contribution barely covered the utilities, but I had never corrected him. I had let him play the king because I thought I was nurturing his confidence. Now I realized I had simply been feeding a monster. I kicked off my heels and walked straight to the small, cramped guest room that Julian referred to as my office. He often joked that it was too big for the little hobby work I did. To the naked eye, it was unremarkable. There was a basic desk, a ergonomic chair that had seen better days, and a laptop that looked like a relic from the early 2010s. This was the stage for my performance. The props of Layla, the data archivist. I sat down and opened the laptop. The screen glowed with a dull gray spreadsheet filled with endless rows of meaningless numbers. This was the interface Julian saw when he deigned to glance at my screen. He saw invoices for plumbing supplies and inventory lists for local bakeries. He saw drudgery. He saw a woman wasting her potential on menial tasks for minimum wage. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed a sequence of keys that I had memorized 15 years ago. Control, Shift, Function, and the F12 key. The screen did not just change, it transformed. The gray spreadsheet dissolved, instantly replaced by a sleek Obsidian interface that pulsed with live data streams. The OmniCore Command Center. My name is Layla Foxworth, and I am not a data entry clerk. I am the founder, the majority shareholder, and the chief architect of OmniCore Systems. 15 years ago, while my peers were partying in dorm rooms, I was writing the foundational code for a logistical artificial intelligence that could predict supply chain disruptions before they happened. I built an empire on efficiency. My algorithms moved 70% of the global shipping containers currently traversing the Atlantic. My software managed the power grids of 3 European nations. OmniCore was not just a company, it was the nervous system of modern commerce, and I was the brain. But success is a lonely summit. I stared at the real-time map of the world on my screen, where thousands of tiny blue lights represented OmniCore assets moving in perfect synchronization. I touched the screen, tracing the path of a freighter navigating a storm in the Pacific. I had learned the hard way that when you are a woman with a 9-figure net worth, love becomes a transaction. In my 20s, I had been engaged to a man who I thought was my soulmate, until my private investigator found his emails to a friend detailing exactly how he planned to spend my fortune once the divorce was finalized. That betrayal broke something inside me. It taught me that my money was a shield, but it was also a target, so I created Layla the freelancer. I stripped away the designer clothes, the luxury cars, and the power. I drove a Honda. I shopped at discount stores. I lived in a modest walk-up apartment. I wanted to be loved for the woman I was, not the empire I owned. Then I met Julian. I closed my eyes, letting the memory wash over me. It was 4 years ago in a coffee shop. He had spilled his latte on my book and insisted on buying me a replacement. He was charming then. He was a mid-level manager at a logistics firm that OmniCore had just acquired. He spoke passionately about efficiency and modernization. He seemed humble. He drove a used sedan and talked about wanting to build something real. I fell for the illusion. When we started dating, I used my influence from the shadows to nudge his career along. I flagged his resume for promotion. I approved his projects through layers of management. I thought I was helping a good man reach his potential. I thought that if gave him the opportunity, his talent would shine. I was wrong. Power does not corrupt people, it reveals them. As Julian climbed the corporate ladder at Omnicore fueled by my invisible hand, he changed. The humble man who bought me a book vanished. In his place stood a man who obsessed over status, who belittled waitstaff, who started referring to people by their net worth rather than their character. And the more money he made, the more he looked down on me. It was a cruel irony. The job he mocked me for, the data entry he called useless, was actually me doing his job for him. Every time he came home stressed about a supply chain crisis, I would stay up late fixing it through my backdoor access, making him look like a genius the next morning. He thought he was a logistical prodigy. He never knew his fiancé was the one moving the chess pieces while he slept. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf on the far wall. I pulled a specific book, a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, and the mechanism clicked. The bookcase swung forward silently, revealing the steel door behind it. This was the only renovation I had insisted on when we moved in. Julian thought it was a structural column. I placed my palm against the biometric scanner. The light turned green, and the door hissed open. Inside was the nerve center. The room was kept at a constant 65 degrees to cool the server racks lining the walls. 6 high-definition monitors curved around a central workstation. This was where the real work happened. This was where Layla Foxworth existed. I sat in the command chair and woke the system. The screens flared to life, displaying data that would make the stock market tremble. But tonight, I was not looking at global shipping routes. I was looking at the internal security logs of Omnicore. I brought up the file labeled Project Chimera. It was the company's most guarded secret, a revolutionary AI protocol for autonomous drone delivery networks. It was worth billions. And according to the logs, someone had been accessing the source code from an unauthorized terminal within the executive suite. I typed in a query tracking the IP address of the leak. The result flashed on the screen in red letters. Terminal ID J_Thorn_exec_01. Julian. My stomach turned. He was not just incompetent, he was a traitor. I expanded the search cross-referencing his activity with external communications. The pattern was undeniable. For the past 6 months, Julian had been sending encrypted data packets to a server in the Cayman Islands. A server registered to a shell company owned by Vortex Corp., our biggest and most ruthless competitor. "You idiot," I whispered to the empty room. He was selling the crown jewels for pocket change. I pulled up the financial transfers. Vortex had paid him $2 million over the last year. $2 million. He was selling a $10 billion technology for $2 million. He was not just greedy, he was bad at business. And it was not just him. I traced the email chains. His father, Arthur Thorne, was using Omnicore shipping containers to move undeclared luxury goods from Italy, avoiding import taxes. His mother, Victoria, was charging her personal shopping sprees to the company's charity account, classifying couture gowns as uniform expenses for underprivileged youth. They were stripping the copper wiring out of the walls of the house I built. I leaned back in the chair watching the data stream. I could stop this right now. I could press one button and lock them all out. I could have security drag them out of their beds tonight, but that would be too easy. That would be a mercy they did not defy. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Julian. "Hey babe, staying in the city tonight. Late strategy meeting with the board for the merger. Don't wait up. Love you." "Strategy meeting," I said aloud, testing the weight of the lie. I typed a command into my console, accessing the GPS data from his company-issued phone. The dot on the map was not at the office. It was not even in the financial district. He was at the St. Regis Hotel. I tapped another key, accessing the hotel's reservation system, which Omnicore also managed through a subsidiary. Room 402. Booked under the name Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Room service had just delivered champagne and strawberries, and he was not alone. I pulled up the credit card authorization for the room. It was his corporate card. He was cheating on me and making my company pay for the room. The pain I expected to feel was absent. In its place was a cold clarity. The man I loved was dead. Perhaps he never existed. What remained was a liability, a virus in my system that needed to be purged. I looked at the date on the corner of my screen. The wedding was in 3 days. The prenup signing was tomorrow night. If I exposed him now, the scandal would damage the stock price. The merger with the legitimate partners would fall through, and worse, he would play the victim. He would claim it was a misunderstanding. He would walk away with a severance package and his dignity intact. No, I wanted total annihilation. I needed him to feel the height of his arrogance before the fall. I needed him to sign that prenup. I needed him to stand in front of the board and claim ownership of everything so that when I pulled the rug out from under him, the world would see him fall. I reached for the secure line phone on my desk. There was only one number programmed into it. "Elias," I said when the line connected. "Ma'am." Elias's voice was crisp and alert despite the late hour. He was my vice president, the public face of my authority and the most loyal man I knew. "I assume you saw the report on the Hamptons party expenses." "I saw it," I said, "but that is the least of our problems, Elias. I am looking at the server logs. Julian is leaking Project Chimera to Vortex." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Treason. Should I cut his access? We can have legal draft the termination papers within the hour." "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. Ma'am, if we fire him now, he warns Vortex. He covers his tracks. He blames it on a subordinate. I want him to think he is winning. I want him to think he is untouchable." "What is the play?" Elias asked. "Operation Purge," I said. "We are going to let the infection run its course for 24 more hours. I want you to document everything, every byte of data he sends, every dollar he steals, every lie he tells. Compile it into a presentation, high definition, for the board meeting, for the history books," I replied. "Also, I need you to prepare the new organizational chart, the one we discussed last month, the one without the Thorne family." "It is already done," Elias said. "And the prenup?" "I am going to sign it," I said. "It is the trapdoor, Elias. They think they are locking me out of their fortune, but they are locking themselves out of mine. It is going to be the most expensive autograph in history." "Understood," Elias said. "And Layla?" "Yes. I am sorry. About him." I looked at the surveillance feed of the hotel lobby where Julian was currently walking toward the elevators, his hand on the lower back of his secretary. "Do not be," I said. "Business is business. Just make sure the security team is ready for the board meeting. I do not want a scene. Actually, scratch that. I want a scene. I want everyone to see it." "Copy that. Good night, ma'am." "Good night, Elias." I hung up the phone. I closed the secure channel and watched the screens go dark one by one until only the blinking cursor remained. I stood up and walked out of the secret room, closing the bookshelf behind me. I went back to the small, cramped desk in the guest room. I sat down and opened the laptop with the gray spreadsheet. I typed in a few numbers, ensuring the timestamp showed I had been working late. Let them think I was the dutiful little worker bee. Let them think I was counting pennies while they stole millions. I walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Julian was toasting to his cleverness. He was celebrating his victory over the woman he thought was too stupid to understand his brilliance. My reflection in the glass looked tired, but my eyes were sharp. "Enjoy the champagne, Julian," I whispered. "It is the last thing you will ever taste that you did not pay for with your soul." Tomorrow I would put on the mask one last time. I would be the blushing bride. I would be the submissive wife. I would be the useless data clerk. And then I would burn their world to the ground. The next morning I walked into the lobby of Omnicore Tower, holding a brown paper bag that smelled faintly of rosemary chicken, and carrying a purse that contained enough surveillance equipment to topple a small government. I had designed this lobby myself 10 years ago. I had chosen the Italian marble for the floors to reflect the morning light, and I had commissioned the kinetic sculpture in the center to represent perpetual motion. To the 1,000 employees streaming past the security turnstiles, I was just another anonymous woman, perhaps a courier or a confused tourist, but to the building itself I was the blood in its veins. I approached the executive reception desk, where a young woman named Tiffany sat filing her nails with an intensity that suggested she was trying to carve her way out of a prison cell. Tiffany was one of Julian's first hires when he took over the regional office. She had no experience in corporate administration, but she had a very active Instagram following and a willingness to look the other way when Julian's friends visited during work hours. "I am here to see Julian Thorne," I said, putting on my best timid voice, the one that made people underestimate me instantly. "I brought him lunch." Tiffany did not look up. She popped a bubble of gum and continued scrutinizing her cuticle. "Do you have an appointment?" "I am his fiancé," I said. She finally glanced at me, letting her eyes drag over my off-the-rack beige cardigan and my sensible flats. Her lip curled slightly. "Right, the data girl. Look, he is in a super important meeting with the senior partners. He said no interruptions." "I can wait," I said, clutching the paper bag tighter. "Suit yourself," she sighed, gesturing vaguely to a low, uncomfortable bench in the corner. "But it is going to be a while. Do not clutter up the seating area with your stuff." I sat down. The bench was positioned intentionally to make visitors feel small and insignificant, a psychological tactic I had approved in the building's original layout plans. The irony that it was now being used against me was not lost. I checked my watch. It was 11:30 in the morning. For the next 2 hours, I sat there invisible. I watched the ebb and flow of my empire. I saw efficiency where my systems were working, and I saw rot where the Thorne family had touched them. At one point, I saw Arthur Thorne, Julian's father, stride through the lobby. He was arguing loudly on his phone, not caring who heard him. "I do not care about the customs manifest," Arthur was shouting. "Just label the container as office supplies." The blue containers bypassing the Port Authority inspection. Yes, the luxury handbags are inside the printer boxes. Just get it done. I lowered my head, pretending to read a magazine while I tapped the record button on my phone. Arthur was using Omnicore's diplomatic shipping channels privileges I had spent years negotiating with international trade federations to smuggle luxury goods and evade taxes. He was turning a logistics giant into a petty smuggling ring. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, the glass doors to the inner executive suite finally opened. I expected Julian to come out, but instead, I saw a scene that made my blood boil. Julian was standing in the doorway, his face red with rage, screaming at a man I recognized immediately. It was Marcus Henderson, the head of compliance. Marcus had been with Omnicore for 8 years. He was a good man with 3 children and a mortgage and an unshakable moral compass. "I am telling you, I cannot sign off on these expense reports." "Julian," Marcus said, his voice shaking but firm, "this is embezzlement. You are claiming a family vacation to the Maldives as a site inspection. We do not even have operations in the Maldives." "I do not pay you to think, Marcus," Julian roared, and his voice echoed across the marble lobby, causing several employees to stop and stare. "I pay you to sign where I tell you to sign. If you are too stupid to understand creative accounting, then you are of no use to me." "It is illegal," Marcus pleaded. "I could go to jail. You could go to jail." "The only place you are going is the unemployment line," Julian spat. "You are fired. Get your things and get out of my building. Security?" 2 security guards hesitated, looking between the screaming executive and the terrified compliance officer. "I said get him out of here," Julian screamed. I watched as Marcus slumped his shoulders, his life collapsing in real time because he refused to become a criminal for a man who was not fit to shine his shoes. Julian slammed the glass door shut, retreating back into his ivory tower. I stood up. My legs felt stiff, but my resolve was harder than the marble beneath my feet. I walked toward the elevators, just as the security guards were escorting Marcus toward the exit. I intercepted them. "Excuse me," I said, soft but authoritative enough to make the guards pause. "I am heading down to the parking garage. I will walk him out." The guards looked at each other. They knew I was the fiancé, even if they did not respect me. They shrugged and released Marcus, allowing him to step into the elevator with me. The doors slid shut, sealing us in silence. Marcus leaned his head against the metal wall, trying to hide the tears welling in his eyes. "I have lost everything," he whispered. 8 years, my pension, my reputation. I reached into my purse, but I did not pull out a tissue. I pulled out a heavy cream-colored business card, embossed with a silver logo that only the highest-level executives at Omnicore possessed. It was Elias's direct line. "Take this," I said, pressing it into his hand. Marcus looked at the card, confused. "What is this, Elias Vance, the executive VP? He will never talk to me. He is the right hand of the owner." "He will talk to you," I said, dropping the timid act for exactly 3 seconds. My voice shifted, becoming the voice of the CEO. "Call this number immediately. Tell him the architect sent you. Tell him you passed the loyalty test. You are not fired, Marcus. You are being promoted to the Internal Audit Task Force. Go home, hug your kids, and wait for the call." The elevator dinged at the lobby level. Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly open, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure around me, but unable to place it. "Go," I said, pushing him gently. "And do not tell anyone you spoke to me." He nodded, dazed, and walked out. I stayed in the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse floor. It was time to deliver lunch. When I reached the executive floor, the atmosphere was different. It was a frat house. Music was playing loudly from Julian's office. I walked past the empty assistant desks, where actual work should have been happening, and pushed open the double doors to Julian's office. He was sitting on the edge of my desk, the mahogany desk I had imported from Italy, laughing with his sister Bella. They were eating takeout sushi from a place that cost $400 a plate. "Well, look who finally made it up," Julian said, his mouth full of tuna. He did not get up to greet me. "I brought you the rosemary chicken you like," I said, lifting the brown bag. "I made it myself." Bella let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oh my God! Julian, she is literally a housewife from the 1950s. Who brings a bagged lunch to a Fortune 500 company? It smells like garlic and desperation." Julian grimaced, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Layla, honestly, look at you. You are wearing that beige thing again. We have clients coming in later. You look like you are here to clean the toilets, not marry the boss. You are embarrassing me." "I just wanted to do something nice," I said, letting my voice crack. I stepped closer to him. "I waited downstairs for 2 hours. Nobody asked you to wait," Julian snapped, sliding off the desk. "You could have just left it with Tiffany, but no, you have to come up here and cling to me. You are so needy, Layla. It is suffocating." He walked past me, heading for the door. "I am going to get some air. You can leave the chicken or throw it away, I do not care. Just go home and try to look less like a peasant before dinner tonight." "I am sorry," I whimpered. "I am so sorry, Julian." I rushed toward him, pretending to stumble in my distress. I collided with his chest, throwing my arms around him as if begging for forgiveness. "Get off me!" He shoved me back, brushing his suit jacket as if I were contagious. "Jesus, Layla, pull yourself together." He stormed out of the office with Bella trailing behind him, snickering. I stood alone in the office. The tears on my face evaporated, instantly replaced by a cold, dry expression. I opened my right hand. Resting in my palm was the small black device I had palmed from my pocket during the collision. I had just skimmed his RFID security badge. I did not leave the chicken. I left the brown bag on his desk, but I tucked it behind a stack of files. Embedded in the thick cardboard base of the bag was a high-range listening transmitter with a battery life of 48 hours. I walked out of the office past the smirking Tiffany in the lobby and out into the street. 30 minutes later, I was back in the safety of my apartment. I went straight to the hidden room and fired up the main terminal. I connected the skimmer to my computer and watched the code cascade down the screen. Access granted. User, Julian Thorne. Clearance level regional admin. I was in. I began digging through the files on his local drive, the ones he thought were secure because they were not on the cloud. I found a folder titled Exit Strategy. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. It was a draft contract, a sale agreement. It was not just Project Chimera. "My God," I whispered. The document was a binding letter of intent to sell the entire research and development division of Omnicore to Vortex Corp for pennies on the dollar. The payment was structured as a series of consulting fees payable to a shell company owned by Julian, Arthur, and Victoria Thorne. They were going to hollow out the company. RD was the engine of Omnicore. Without it, we were just a trucking company with too much debt. They were planning to sell the future of the business to line their pockets and leave the empty husk for the shareholders and employees. and the date of the sale was set for 2 days after the wedding. "They are not just parasites," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "They are butchers." I looked at the listening device feed on my second monitor. The audio from Julian's office crackled to life. "She is so pathetic," I heard Bella's voice say clearly. "Did you see her face?" "I made it myself. God, I cannot wait until you divorce her. How long do we have to wait?" "Just a year," Julian's voice replied. "The prenup holds for a year. Once the sale goes through and the money is in the offshore accounts, I will file for irreconcilable differences. I will give her the apartment and the Honda. That should be enough for a data entry clerk." "You are too generous, brother," Bella laughed. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitors illuminating the tears that finally fell. Not tears of sadness, but tears of absolute furious clarity. They thought I was the mark. They thought I was the victim. I reached for the keyboard. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I had the means. Now I just needed the stage. I minimized the surveillance window and opened a new command prompt. I began to type the code for a new program, one that would run during the board meeting tomorrow. I named the file Protocol Red Wedding. "You want a divorce, Julian," I said to the screen. "I will give you a separation so violent it will tear your entire reality apart." I worked through the night, the sound of their mockery playing on a loop in the background, fueling every keystroke, every line of code, every trap I set. By the time the sun rose, I was no longer Layla the fiancé. I was the executioner, and the guillotine was sharp. The library of the Thorne estate was a room designed to intimidate. It was lined with books that had never been cracked open and smelled of lemon polish and old money pretension. This was where they had decided to stage the execution of my financial future. It was 1 week before the wedding, and the air was thick with a tension that felt less like a family gathering and more like a court-martial. I sat on a stiff, high-backed leather chair that was positioned slightly lower than the others, a subtle psychological power play that I noted with a detached amusement. Across from me sat Julian, flanked by his parents, Arthur and Victoria. At the head of the table sat Mr. Sterling, the family lawyer, a man with a comb over that defied gravity and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror for hours. "Now, Layla." "Mr. Sterling began sliding a document across the polished mahogany table toward me. The paper was thick, creamy, and bound in a blue legal folder. "As we discussed, this is just a standard prenuptial agreement. It is a formality, really. Just something to keep everyone's mind at ease given the disparity in assets." I looked at the document. It was 50 pages thick. "Standard," I repeated softly, keeping my hands folded in my lap. "Of course. We just want to make sure everyone is protected," Julian said. He was checking his watch, probably counting down the minutes until he could go meet his friends for drinks. "It is not that we do not trust you, babe, but business is business." I reached out and opened the folder. My eyes scanned the legal jargon. I read fast. It was a skill I had honed over a decade of reading complex contracts and coding scripts. The terms were not standard. They were draconian. Clause 4, Section B, stated that in the event of a divorce, regardless of the cause, even infidelity or abuse, I would be entitled to 0% of the marital assets. Clause 7, Section C, stipulated that any assets I acquired during the marriage would be considered joint property and subject to Julian's control, while any assets he acquired would remain sole and separate property. But the real kicker was Clause 9. It was an indemnity clause that required me to pay Julian a reputational damage fee of $500,000 if I filed for divorce within the first 10 years. I looked up, my face a mask of confusion. "This says, if we divorce, I have to pay you." Victoria let out a short, sharp laugh. She was wearing a silk blouse that cost $3,000, paid for by an Omnicore expense account I had flagged just yesterday. "Oh, stop looking so wounded, Layla," Victoria sneered. "We have to protect Julian. He is a man of status, a man of significant means. You are, well, let us be honest, dear. You are a data clerk. You have nothing to bring to this marriage but your student loans and that dreadful car. We are the ones taking the risk here." "My job is not useless," I whispered, feeding them the reaction they wanted. "It is a hobby," Arthur chimed in, pouring himself a scotch. It is cute, but it does not put caviar on the table. This contract ensures that you are not just marrying Julian for a payday. We have had girls like you sniff around before trying to dig for gold. We just want to make sure you are here for the right reasons. I looked back down at the contract. My heart was not pounding in fear, it was beating with the steady rhythm of a predator stalking its prey. I turned the page to the financial disclosure section, and there it was. The mistake. The fatal, arrogant mistake. Mr. Sterling had included a schedule of assets, where Julian had to list everything he owned to prove what was his before the marriage. It was a requirement for the prenup to be valid. If he hid assets, the contract was void. If he listed them, he was claiming legal ownership. I read the list. Item 1. The Hamptons estate. Item 2. The penthouse apartment in Manhattan. Item 3. A portfolio of stocks in Omnicore Systems valued at $4 million. Item 4. The 60-foot yacht. The Golden Julian. I felt a smile threaten to break through my mask. The Hamptons estate was owned by an Omnicore subsidiary for corporate retreats. The penthouse was leased by my holding company. The stocks were phantom shares options that had not vested yet, which he had illegally transferred to his personal account. The yacht was purchased with funds siphoned from the logistics maintenance budget. He had just listed stolen property as his personal assets on a notarized legal document. He was confessing to grand larceny, tax fraud, and embezzlement in writing, and he was about to have it witnessed by a lawyer. Is something wrong, Mr.? Sterling asked, his voice dripping with condescension. If the legal language is too complex for you, I can explain it in simpler terms. No, I said, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. I think I understand. I want to make sure I am doing this right. This list here, Schedule A, is this everything? Julian scoffed. Yes, it is everything, Layla. Why expecting more? No, I said hastily. I just mean, if I sign this, I am acknowledging that all of this belongs to you, right? Like legally, it is yours, no one else's. Exactly, Julian said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with greed. The house, the cars, the stocks, it is all mine. I built it, I earned it, and this paper says you can never touch it. And the company knows, I asked softly. Omnicore, they know these are yours. Arthur slammed his glass down. What kind of stupid question is that? Of course they know. We run that company. We are the company. Now sign the damn paper so we can go to dinner. Okay, I said. As long as it is all transparent. I believe in honesty. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. Mr. Sterling offered. The black ink looked like oil. I hesitated for a fraction of a second just to make them sweat. Sign it, Layla, Victoria hissed, or the wedding is off. I lowered the pen to the paper. I signed my name, Layla Foxworth. With that signature, I had just handed the district attorney a signed confession. I had just turned their shield into a sword. Done? Mr. Sterling snatched the paper away the moment the ink was dry. He stamped it with a notary seal, the sound echoing in the silent room like a gavel strike. Congratulations. You are officially protected. Finally, Julian stood up, stretching his arms. God, that was tedious. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The tension evaporated, replaced by a loose, triumphant cruelty. They had won. They had the girl, they had the protection, and they had the power. Well, Victoria said, standing up and smoothing her skirt, since that unpleasantness is out of the way, let us discuss the living arrangements after the honeymoon. Living arrangements? I asked, still sitting in the lower chair. I thought we were staying in the penthouse. We are, Julian said, walking over to the bar to join his father. But things are going to change a little, Layla. Mom and I were talking. Now that we are married, you really do not need to keep up that charade of a job. But I like my work, I said. It is embarrassing, Bella said from the corner where she had been texting. My friends think it is hilarious that my sister-in-law is basically a secretary. You need to quit. And besides, Victoria added, walking over to me and placing a cold hand on my shoulder, We are going to let the housekeeping staff go at the penthouse. It is an unnecessary expense now that you will be home all day. You can handle the cleaning and the cooking. It will be good for you. It will keep you humble." I stared at her. "You want me to be the maid?" "I want you to contribute," Julian said over his shoulder. "Since you are not contributing financially as we just established with that contract, you can contribute labor. It is only fair, Layla. I bring home the millions, you keep the home. That is the deal." "And if we have children," Arthur added, his face flushed with drink, "you will raise them. No nannies. We do not want strangers raising Thorne heirs. You will be a full-time mother and wife. No more of this career nonsense." I sat very still. They were not just protecting their money. They were planning to enslave me. They wanted to strip away my identity, my independence, and my dignity until I was nothing more than an accessory they could use and discard. "I understand," I said, my voice steady. "You want me to know my place?" "Exactly," Victoria smiled, patting my cheek. "You are learning. You are a lucky girl, Layla. Most women would kill to be in your position. Do not ruin it by having an ego." "I would not dream of it," I said. I stood up. "If you will excuse me, I need to use the restroom. The excitement. It is a bit much." "Go ahead." Julian waved his hand dismissively. "We are going to open a bottle of the 1942 Scotch. Do not take too long, we have a reservation at Le Bernardin in an hour." I walked out of the library, my steps quiet on the plush carpet. As soon as I was in the hallway, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out my phone. The voice recorder app was still running. The red waveform on the screen was pulsing gently, capturing every insult, every threat, every admission of guilt. I pressed stop and then save. I named the file Exhibit A, the confession. I walked into the guest bathroom and locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were burning. "You want a maid," I whispered to my reflection. "I will clean house all right. I will scrub this entire company clean of every single one of you." I uploaded the recording to the secure cloud server. Then I sent a text message to Elias. "The trap is sprung." He signed the asset list. "Proceed with the forensic audit of the items listed in the prenup. Prepare the eviction notices for the Hamptons estate and the penthouse. I want them ready to be served the moment the board meeting ends." Elias replied 3 seconds later. "Received. The lawyers are going to have a field day with this." "Are you okay, ma'am?" "I am better than okay." I typed back, "I am ready." I unlocked the bathroom door and walked back toward the library, where the laughter of the Thorne family was echoing off the walls. They were toasting to their cleverness. They were drinking my scotch in my house, celebrating how they had trapped me. I walked back in, putting the mask of the submissive wife back on. "Ready for dinner?" Julian asked, grinning at me. "I am buying. Well, technically the company is buying, but same thing, right?" "Right," I smiled, taking his arm. "The company pays for everything. For now." I thought, "But the bill is coming due, Julian, and you do not have enough credit left in your soul to pay it." The night of the Omnicore annual gala arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes silk cling to skin and tempers snap like dry twigs. This event was the crown jewel of the corporate social calendar, a night where the city's elite gathered to drink champagne that cost more than a teacher's salary and pretend they cared about the charitable causes listed on the glossy brochures. For 5 years I had attended this gala as a shadow. I had stood by the walls watching the company I built celebrate successes I had orchestrated while the applause was directed at empty suits and figureheads. But tonight was different. Tonight I was walking into the lion's den not as a spectator, but as the architect of their destruction. I had chosen my dress carefully. It was a midnight blue gown cut from heavy silk velvet that caught the light like the ocean at deep twilight. It was structured and elegant, with a neckline that commanded respect and a silhouette that screamed power. It was the kind of dress Layla, the CEO, would wear. I had bought it with cash from a boutique in Paris 3 years ago and kept it hidden in the back of my closet, waiting for the right moment to wear armor. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom, smoothing the fabric over my hips. For a fleeting second, I felt like myself. I felt like the woman who commanded a global fleet, the woman who could silence a boardroom with a single glance. The door opened and Julian walked in. He was adjusting the cufflinks on his tuxedo, looking every inch the corporate prince. He stopped when he saw me, but his expression was not one of admiration. It was a sneer of irritation. "What is that?" he asked, gesturing at my gown. "It is a dress for the gala," I said, turning to face him. "Do you like it?" "It is too much," Julian said, walking over and inspecting the fabric with a critical eye. "You look like you are trying to compete with the wives of the board members. It is desperate, Layla. You are a data archivist, not a debutante. You look like a little girl playing dress-up in her mother's clothes." The insult was precise, designed to make me feel small. "I thought I should look nice for your big night," I said, keeping my voice low. "You should look appropriate," he corrected. He walked to the closet and rummaged through the coats. He pulled out an old beige trench coat I used for running errands in the rain. It was shapeless, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and utterly unremarkable. "Put this on," he ordered, tossing it onto the bed. "It is an indoor gala, Julian," I said. "I cannot wear a trench coat inside." "You will keep it on over that dress," he said, fixing his tie in the mirror. "Tell people you are feeling a chill, or that you are coming down with a flu. I do not care what you say. Just keep it covered. I do not want you strutting around looking like you think you own the place. It sends the wrong message. We are trying to appear humble tonight, Layla. We want the board to think we are conservative, responsible people, not flashy spenders." The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. He was wearing a $50,000 watch and planning to announce a multi-billion-dollar fraud, but my dress was the problem. "Fine," I said, picking up the coat. "I will wear it." I slipped the beige coat over the velvet gown. It instantly ruined the silhouette, making me look frumpy and ill-fitting. I looked like a woman who had crashed the party, not the woman who paid for it. "Much better," Julian said, patting my cheek with a patronizing tap. "Now you look like yourself. Come on, the driver is waiting." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was transformed into a winter wonderland of crystal and white roses. And string quartet played soft classical music in the corner, while waiters circulated with trays of caviar and truffle arancini. I knew exactly how much this evening cost. I had approved the budget myself 3 months ago. $250,000 for the venue, $80,000 for the flowers, $40,000 for the lighting. Every dollar spent was my money. And the people drinking my wine were the very people conspiring to steal the rest of it. Julian gripped my elbow, guiding me through the crowd. "Listen to me closely," he hissed in my ear, his breath hot and smelling of mints. "Tonight is critical. I am going to be talking to very important people. The CEO of Vortex Corp is here. We are finalizing the merger terms. You are not to speak unless spoken to. Do not offer opinions. Do not try to make jokes. Just stand there, smile, and nod. If anyone asks what you do, tell them you are between jobs. It sounds better than data entry." "Understood," I said, my eyes scanning the room. I saw the security details stationed at the exits. They were my men. I saw Elias standing near the stage talking to the event coordinator. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second and gave a barely perceptible nod. The trap was set. Julian dragged me toward a group of men standing near the ice sculpture. At the center of the group was a man I had only seen in dossier photos. Silas Sterling, the CEO of Vortex Corp. Silas was a man who looked like he had been greased with oil. He was short, loud, and wore a suit that was too shiny under the ballroom lights. He was the shark that had been circling Omnicore for years trying to buy our technology. And now, thanks to the Thorne family treason, he thought he had won. "Silas," Julian called out, extending his hand. "So glad you could make it." Silas turned his eyes, lighting up with predatory glee. "Julian, my boy, the man of the hour. I hear congratulations are in order. The rumors say you are taking full control of the regional operations." "That is the plan," Julian grinned. "We are just waiting for the ink to dry." Silas laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. Then his eyes drifted to me. He looked at my beige trench coat the way one looks at a stain on a carpet. "And who is this?" Silas asked. "Did you bring your assistant? Or is the coat check girl lost?" I felt Julian stiffen beside me. A real man would have defended his fiancée. A real man would have introduced me with pride. Julian laughed. Oh no, this is Layla, my fiancée. She is feeling a bit under the weather, hence the coat. She is not really part of the industry. She keeps the home fires burning, if you know what I mean. Silas stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of cigars and expensive cologne. Is that so, a house mouse? Very quaint. You know, sweetie, if you are looking for extra work, I am sure the catering staff could use a hand clearing tables. That coat certainly looks the part. He reached out and flicked the lapel of my trench coat. It was a gesture of utter disrespect. He was treating me like a servant, like an object. I stood perfectly still. My hands were clenched into fists inside the deep pockets of the coat. Actually, I said, my voice steady and cold, I am quite busy with my own projects, Mr. Sterling. But thank you for the offer. Silas raised an eyebrow, surprised that the furniture had spoken. Feisty, he chuckled, looking at Julian. I like that. Keep a tight leash on her, Julian. You do not want her getting ideas above her station. Oh, do not worry, Julian said, wrapping a possessive arm around my shoulders, squeezing hard enough to bruise. Layla knows exactly where she stands. She is just here to look pretty. Well, as pretty as she can in that coat. The group erupted in laughter. Julian laughed the loudest, desperate to impress the man who was about to dismantle his career. I forced a smile. Laugh. I thought, laugh while you still have teeth. Excuse me, I said, pulling away from Julian's grip. I need to get some water. Go. Julian waved me away without looking. Bring me a scotch while you are at it. I walked away from them, moving through the crowd like a ghost. I found a quiet corner near the stage and watched. I saw Arthur and Victoria holding court at a table near the front. They were whispering with the Vortex legal team, clinking glasses and looking smug. They were discussing the timeline. I could read it on their lips. Tomorrow. The announcement. The takeover. They believed the phantom chairman was a myth or an absentee landlord who would not notice the company being sold out from under him until it was too late. They had no idea the chairman was standing 10 feet away, wearing a beige trench coat. Suddenly the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The chatter died down. A spotlight hit the center of the stage. Elias walked out. Usually, the regional director would give the speech at the gala. Julian adjusted his tie, preparing to step forward, expecting to be called up. He had his speech written on index cards in his pocket, but Elias did not call Julian. Elias stood at the podium looking grave. He did not smile. He did not offer the usual platitudes about a successful year. Ladies and gentlemen, Elias said, his voice amplified through the high-quality sound system. Thank you for joining us tonight. Usually this evening is a time for celebration. However, in light of recent developments, the board of directors has decided to alter the program. A ripple of confusion went through the room. I saw Julian frown, stopping mid-step. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Elias continued. Omnicorp will be holding an emergency session of the full board. Attendance is mandatory for all executive officers. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Furthermore, Elias said, looking directly at the table where the Thorne family sat, I have been authorized to announce that the chairman of Omnicorp, the founder and majority shareholder, will be in attendance personally. He has flown in to address serious irregularities in the company's management. He will be revealing the future of the corporation and addressing the rumors of an unauthorized merger. The room erupted in whispers. The chairman, I heard someone whisper nearby. Nobody has seen him in 10 years. Is he real? Another asked. Irregularities, a third voice hissed. That sounds like an investigation. I looked at the Thorne family. Their faces were a study in panic. Arthur dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. Victoria clutched her pearl necklace, her face draining of color. Julian looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at Silas Sterling, who was now frowning, checking his phone nervously. Elias leaned into the microphone one last time. Enjoy your evening. Drink the champagne. Tomorrow we get to work. He walked off stage, leaving the room in a state of chaotic speculation. Julian rushed over to his parents. I followed, keeping my distance, but close enough to hear. "What does this mean?" Victoria hissed, grabbing Julian's arm. "The chairman, is he coming here? Does he know?" "He cannot know," Julian said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We have covered our tracks. The shell companies are secure. This is just a scare tactic. The old man is probably coming to give a retirement speech. That is all." "But Elias said irregularities," Arthur stammered. "He looked right at us." "Calm down," Julian snapped, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "We are the executives. We run the day to day. If the chairman comes, we will charm him. We will show him the numbers we doctored. He is an old man, probably senile. We can manipulate him, just like we manipulate the board. The deal with Vortex goes through tomorrow afternoon, regardless of what some old fossil says." "Are you sure?" Victoria asked. "I am sure," Julian said, straightening his jacket. "I am the regional director. I am the future of this company. Nobody, not even the founder, can touch me." He turned and saw me standing there. The fear in his eyes was instantly replaced by anger, as if my witnessing his moment of doubt was an insult. He marched over to me, grabbing my wrist and pulling me toward the exit. "We are leaving," he growled. "But the party," I said. "You have not had your scotch." "Shut up," he hissed. "We have to prepare for tomorrow. I have to call the lawyers." We walked out into the cool night air, waiting for the valet to bring the car. The mood was electric with tension. Julian leaned in close to me, his face inches from mine. The arrogance was back, a defensive shell to hide his fear. "Listen to me," he whispered. "Tomorrow is going to be a war zone. But I will win. I always win. By noon tomorrow, I will be the king of this empire. I will own it all. And you better learn how to be a silent queen. You better learn to support me blindly, because if you hesitate, if you embarrass me in front of the chairman, I will cut you off so fast you will be back to eating ramen in a studio apartment before sunset." He squeezed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. "Do you understand me, Layla? You are nothing without me." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had once thought I loved. I saw the fear behind his eyes, the pathetic greed, the hollowness of his soul. I reached up and gently removed his hand from my arm. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time in 3 years, I let the mask slip just a fraction. I let him see the steel beneath the velvet. "You are right, Julian," I said, my voice calm and terrifyingly clear. "Tomorrow, everything changes. And I think you are going to be surprised by just how silent I can be when the real king speaks." He blinked, confused by my tone. He opened his mouth to insult me again, but the valet pulled up in his leased Mercedes. "Get in," he muttered, unsettled. I slid into the passenger seat. I looked back at the hotel, at the ballroom where the lights were still shining. "Sleep well, Julian," I thought as the car pulled away. "Tomorrow you meet the chairman, and she is not happy." The taillights of Julian's Mercedes faded into the darkness of the city street, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk outside our building. He had barely slowed down enough to let me out, muttering a vague excuse about a crisis strategy meeting with his legal team. It was a lie, of course. My tracking software showed his reservation at the Saint. Regis was still active, and he had ordered a second bottle of Dom Perignon to the room 10 minutes ago. He was not going to a war room. He was going to celebrate his premature victory in the arms of his mistress. Believing his fiancé was safely tucked away in bed, worrying about wedding seating charts. I took the elevator up to the penthouse. The silence inside was absolute. For years, this silence had felt oppressive, a reminder of the emotional distance between us. Tonight, it felt like a blank canvas. I did not turn on the lights in the main living area. I navigated by memory, walking past the imported Italian sofa I had paid for, and the abstract art Julian claimed to love but did not understand. I went straight to the guest room, pushing aside the bookshelf to reveal the steel door. My palm hit the scanner, and the lock disengaged with a heavy mechanical thud. I stepped into the cool blue light of my command center for the last time. Tonight was not about observation. Tonight was about execution. I sat in the command chair and typed a single command into the central console: initiate ghost protocol. The screens around me shifted from passive monitoring to active intervention. Ghost Protocol was a fail-safe measure I had designed 5 years ago, a digital kill switch embedded deep within the Omnicore infrastructure, meant to be used only in the event of a hostile takeover or a catastrophic security breach. It was time. I pulled up the banking interface. On the left screen was a visualization of the Thorne family's financial network. It was a tangled web of offshore account shell companies and hidden trusts. They thought they were clever. They thought moving money through the Cayman Islands and Switzerland made it untraceable. But they had moved that money using Omnicore's digital banking channels, unaware that I owned the encryption keys. I watched the numbers scroll by. $3 million in a shell company called Viper Holdings, $2 million in Blue Ocean LLC, another $500,000 in a trust fund for Bella. All of it stolen. All of it mine. I entered my authorization code, Alpha09 exec. I initiated a global freeze order. One by one, the status indicators next to their accounts turned from green to red. Account 8940. Frozen. Account 2213. Frozen. Account 7765. Frozen. I did not seize the money yet. That would alert their banks immediately. Instead, I placed a compliance hold on the funds, flagging them for review under international anti-money laundering statutes. It was a bureaucratic nightmare that would take months to untangle. When they tried to access their funds tomorrow morning to pay their high-priced lawyers or book emergency flights, they would find their cards declined and their assets locked tight. "Transaction denied," I whispered, watching the red lights consume their financial future. Have fun explaining that to the Swiss authorities. Next, I opened the secure channel to the Omnicore Physical Security Division. I typed a message to the head of global security, a man named Stone, who had been with me since the garage days. Code red. Executive floor lockdown, effective 0700 hours tomorrow. Revoke all access badges for Julian Thorne, Arthur Thorne, Victoria Thorne, and Bella Thorne. Do not alert them. Let them enter the building, but do not let them access the elevator to the boardroom without escort. I want them contained. Stone's reply came through instantly. Understood. Ma'am, we will have a team waiting in the lobby. Legal is standing by. Good. I typed. Prepare the termination packets. I want them on the boardroom table before I arrive. I closed the channel. The trap was armed. The cage was locked. Now I just needed to prepare the executioner. I left the command center, leaving the door open. I would not need to hide it anymore. I walked into the master bedroom, the room I had shared with a man who looked at me with contempt. I opened the closet. On the left side were Julian's rows of bespoke suits, arranged by color. On the right was my wardrobe. It was filled with beige cardigans, shapeless dresses, and sensible slacks, the costume of Layla, the data archivist. I grabbed a black trash bag from under the sink. I began to pull the clothes off the hangers. The beige cardigan I wore to the office trash. The gray dress Bella had stained with wine trash. The modest pajamas Julian preferred because he said they were wholesome trash. I worked with a methodical ruthlessness, clearing out every trace of the woman I had pretended to be. I stripped the bed of its sheets. I cleared my toiletries from the bathroom counter. I took down the photo of us from the nightstand, a picture where he was looking at the camera, and I was looking at him with adoration. I snapped the frame in half and dropped it into the bag. When I was finished, the room looked sterile. It looked like a hotel room where a guest had checked out. I went to the back of the closet to the hidden panel behind the shoe rack. I pressed the latch and it popped open, revealing a garment bag stamped with the logo of a private tailor in Milan. I unzipped the bag. Inside was my armor. It was a suit I had commissioned for this exact day. It was not black. Black was for funerals. This was a deep charcoal gray tailored to within a millimeter of my life, with sharp lapels and a silk lining that felt like cool water against my skin. I shed the trench coat and the velvet gown, letting them fall to the floor. I dressed slowly. The trousers broke perfectly at the ankle. The white silk blouse was crisp and authoritative. The jacket fit like a second skin, broadening my shoulders and straightening my spine. I walked to the safe in the floor of the closet. I spun the dial and opened it. Inside sat a velvet box. I opened it to reveal my watch. A Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. It was worth $2.5 million. I fastened it around my wrist, feeling the weight of it. It was heavy. It was the weight of power. I looked in the full-length mirror. Layla, the data clerk, was gone. The woman staring back at me was terrifying. Her eyes were hard. Her jaw was set, and she radiated a kind of dangerous calm that made the air around her feel charged. "Hello, Alexandra," I said softly, using the middle name I used for my corporate identity. As I adjusted my cuffs, a memory surfaced unbidden. It was from 20 years ago. I was 10 years old, sitting in the back of my father's small logistics shop. It was a dusty, cluttered place smelling of diesel and coffee. My father was a good man. He was kind. He gave credit to customers who could not pay. He trusted handshake deals. I remembered the day the corporate raiders came. They were men in suits just like Julian. They smiled. They made promises. And then they used the fine print to strip my father of everything he owned. I remembered watching him cry at the kitchen table, holding a foreclosure notice his kindness used as a weapon against him. He had looked at me, his eyes red and rimmed with exhaustion, and said words that had etched themselves into my DNA. "Layla," he had said, his voice cracking, "listen to me. Being good is not enough. The world is full of wolves in expensive suits. If you want to survive, you have to be smarter than them. And if you have to fight, you do not fight to hurt. You fight to win. Kindness misplaced is suicide, but ruthlessness applied at the right moment, that is justice." He died of a heart attack 2 years later. Broke and broken. I touched the cold glass of the mirror. "I listened, Dad," I whispered. "I learned, and tomorrow I'm going to hunt the wolves." I walked back to the command center. There was one final loose end to tie up before the morning. I sat down at the console and pulled up the surveillance feed from the St. Regis Hotel. The camera in the hallway showed Julian's door, room 402. I accessed the hotel's internal network again. I pulled up the room service bill: champagne, strawberries, oysters, a charger for an iPhone. I opened a secure email client. I composed a new message: to Julian, Thorn Omnicore, com. Subject: a wedding gift. I attached 3 files. The first was a high-resolution screenshot of his current hotel bill, showing the double occupancy and the champagne order stamped with the current time. The second was a photo taken by the hotel's elevator security camera showing him kissing his secretary 20 minutes ago. The third was a PDF copy of the prenuptial agreement he had signed yesterday, specifically highlighting Clause 4, the one that stated he got nothing in the event of a divorce, and the schedule of assets, where he claimed ownership of stolen property. I typed a short message in the body of the email. "Dear Julian, I hope the champagne is worth it. I just wanted to let you know that I have reviewed the merger documents for tomorrow. You missed a clause, the one about the owner's consent. Do not worry, though. I will explain it to you in person at the board meeting. Sleep tight. You are going to need your rest. P.S. Your corporate card has been declined for the room service. You might want to ask your friend to pay." The useless data clerk. I hovered my finger over the enter key. This was the psychological strike. This was the moment fear would set in. I pressed send. On the surveillance monitor, I watched the hallway. 2 minutes passed. Then the door to room 402 flew open. Julian stumbled out into the hallway. He was wearing a hotel robe, his hair messy, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He was clutching his phone, staring at the screen as if it were a bomb. He frantically tapped the screen, trying to call me. My phone on the desk buzzed. "Incoming call, Julian." I let it ring. He dialed again. And again, I watched him pace back and forth in the hallway. He looked small. He looked trapped. He started shouting at his phone, his gestures wild and desperate. The door opened again, and his mistress leaned out, looking confused. He shoved her back inside and slammed the door. He tried to call his father, then his mother. I checked the status of their phones on my network. I had jammed their signals for the next hour. He was isolated. He was alone with the truth, and he had nowhere to run. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the expensive carpet of the hotel corridor. He looked at his phone, then at the elevator, then at nothing. He knew. He did not know the whole picture yet. He did not know I was the CEO. He probably thought I had hacked him, or that I was working with someone. But he knew his game was over. He knew I had the evidence, but arrogance is a powerful drug. I could see the gears turning in his head even from here. He stood up slowly, wiping a hand across his face. He straightened his robe. He was convincing himself that he could fix this. He was telling himself that I was just a woman, that he could talk his way out of it, that he could threaten me or bribe me. He walked back into the room, not with the swagger of a conqueror, but with the desperate resolve of a cornered rat. "That is right, Julian," I said to the screen. "Convince yourself you still have a chance. Come to the meeting. Walk into the slaughterhouse." I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked out of the apartment, leaving the door unlocked. I did not need keys anymore. I took the elevator down to the private garage where my real car, a matte black sedan with bulletproof glass, had been delivered by Stone an hour ago. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather smelled new. The engine purred with a low, menacing growl. I drove out into the city, the streetlights blurring into streaks of gold and red. The city was asleep, but I was wide awake. I drove toward Omnicore Tower. I would sleep in my office tonight. I wanted to be there when the sun rose. I wanted to be sitting in the chair at the head of the table when they walked in. The storm had arrived, and I was the lightning. The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Omnicore executive boardroom like a laser, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air conditioning and the palpable tension that hung heavy over the mahogany table. I was watching them from the security antechamber, a small soundproof room hidden behind a one-way mirror that comprised the far wall of the boardroom. They had no idea I was there. They had no idea that the useless data clerk was standing 10 feet away, watching them like a scientist observing lab rats in a maze that was about to be flooded. It was 8:45 in the morning. Julian and the Thorne family had arrived 10 minutes ago. They walked in with the bluster of conquerors who were secretly terrified the ground was about to open up beneath them. Julian looked terrible. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, his tan looked sallow, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of expensive concealer could hide. He was checking his phone every 30 seconds, his thumb twitching over the screen, likely rereading the email I had sent him the night before. He was trying to call his lawyers, but the signal jamming I had authorized for this floor was turning his device into a useless brick. "Sit down, Julian," Victoria hissed, adjusting her pearls. She was wearing a Chanel suit that I knew for a fact had been charged to the Employee Wellness Fund. "Stop pacing. You are making me nervous. If the chairman is coming, we need to present a united front." "My phone is dead," Julian muttered, slamming the device onto the table. "No signal. I cannot get a hold of Sterling. If that email Layla sent... If she actually has those documents..." "She is bluffing," Arthur Thorne said, pouring himself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher. His hands were shaking. "She is a secretary. Son, a glorified typist. She probably photoshopped that picture. She does not have the access to get internal files. It is a desperate attempt to stop the wedding because she knows she is out of her league." "Right," Julian exhaled, smoothing his tie. "Right. She is just jealous. She's trying to scare me." He walked to the head of the table. The boardroom table was a massive slab of black walnut, 20 feet long. At the far end was the chairman's seat, a high-backed leather chair that had remained empty for a decade. It was almost a throne. Julian placed his hand on the back of the chair. "Excuse me," said Mr. Henderson, one of the legitimate board members, a quiet man who represented the pension fund investors. "That is the chairman's seat. Julian, you should sit at the side." Julian turned on him with a snarl. "The chairman is an absentee landlord who has not set foot in this building since the Obama administration. I am the regional director. I run this company. And after the merger today, I will be the CEO. This is my seat." He pulled the chair out and sat down. He looked small in it. He looked like a child trying to drive a tank. "Move," Victoria snapped at Mrs. Gable, the head of HR, pointing to the seat to Julian's right. "That is my seat. Family sits at the head." Mrs. Gable, a woman with 30 years of experience, looked at Victoria with utter disbelief. But the atmosphere of intimidation the Thorns had cultivated was strong. She gathered her files and moved down the table. The Thorn family occupied the power positions. Julian at the head, his parents flanking him, and Bella sitting next to her mother, scrolling on her phone and chewing gum. They looked like royalty. They looked like they owned the place. I checked my watch. The Patek Philippe on my wrist read 8:59. "It is time," I said to Elias, who was standing beside me in the antechamber. Elias nodded. He was wearing his formal suit, his face set in a grim line. Behind him stood Stone and 4 members of the elite security team, dressed in tactical suits. "Are you ready, ma'am?" Elias asked. I adjusted the lapels of my charcoal suit. I touched the cold metal of the door handle. "I have been ready for 5 years," I replied. I watched the second hand on my watch sweep past the 12, 9 o'clock. I pushed the button to open the main doors. The double doors to the boardroom swung open with a hydraulic hiss. The sound was loud in the quiet room, causing everyone at the table to jump. Julian spun the chairman's chair around to face the entrance, a practiced smile plastered on his face, ready to charm the elderly, senile founder he had imagined. "Mr. Chairman," Julian began, rising halfway out of his seat. "Welcome to, His voice died in his throat. I walked in. I did not walk in like Layla the fiancé. I did not walk with the hesitant, apologetic gait I had adopted for years to make Julian feel taller. I walked with the long, confident strides of a predator entering its territory. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, a sharp, rhythmic percussion that echoed off the glass walls. Click, click, click. I stopped 10 feet from the table. Behind me, Elias and the security team filed in, lining up against the wall like a firing squad. They stood with their hands clasped behind their backs, their eyes fixed on the Thorns. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. Julian stared at me. His mouth hung open slightly. He blinked, once, twice, as if trying to reset his vision. His brain could not process what he was seeing. He saw Layla, but he did not see the beige cardigan or the messy bun. He saw a woman in a $5,000 suit, wearing a watch worth more than his life, staring at him with eyes that were absolute zero. Then, the denial kicked in. He laughed. It was a nervous, incredulous bark of a laugh. "Layla," he asked, his voice cracking, "what the hell are you doing here?" He looked past me to the security guards, then back to me. Did you follow me?" he asked, his tone shifting from confusion to anger. "I told you I was in a critical meeting. Jesus, Layla, this is the boardroom, not a coffee shop. You cannot just barge in here because you are upset about a text message." I said nothing. I just looked at him. Victoria stood up, her face flushing red. "This is mortifying," she hissed. "She is having a breakdown. Look at her, dressed up in a man's suit like she's playing pretend. Layla, get out. You are embarrassing Julian." "I think she is here to deliver the coffee," Bella snickered, though she looked uneasy as she eyed the security guards. "Did you bring the sandwiches too, Layla? Or did you burn them like you burn everything else?" "Security!" Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Remove this woman. She is trespassing. She is a disturbed ex-girlfriend who is harassing the executive staff. Get her out of here now." Stone, the head of security, did not twitch. He stared straight ahead, ignoring Julian completely. "I said get her out," Julian screamed, his voice rising to a falsetto panic. "Do you hear me? I am the regional director. I sign your paychecks. Throw her out." Still, nobody moved. The other board members were watching with wide eyes. Sensing the shift in gravity, they looked from Julian, sweaty and screaming, to me, silent and still. "Why are they not moving?" Arthur whispered, pulling at his collar. "Julian, why are they not listening?" "Because," I spoke for the first time. My voice was not loud, but it carried the acoustic authority of the room I had designed. It was calm, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Because they do not work for you, Julian," I said. They work for me. Julian froze. What you data entry clerk. You work for a temp agency. You are delirious. I started walking again. I walked past the other board members. Mr. Henderson looked up at me, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes. He saw the resemblance to the founder, my father. He saw the authority. He nodded slowly, respectfully. I reached the head of the table. Julian was standing between me and the chairman's chair. He was blocking my path, puffing out his chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "You need to leave," he growled, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Right now, go home, pack your bags, and get out of my apartment. We are done. Layla, you just cost yourself the only chance you had at a comfortable life." I looked up at him. I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. "Comfort was never the goal, Julian," I said softly. "Control was." I lifted the heavy leather folder I was carrying. It contained the termination papers, the forensic accounting evidence, and the signed prenuptial agreement. I dropped it onto the table. Bam! The sound was like a gunshot in the enclosed space. Bella flinched. Victoria jumped. Julian took a step back, startled by the violence of the action. "You are sitting in the wrong seat," I said. "This is the chairman's seat," Julian spat, trying to regain his composure. "It belongs to the owner of Omnicorp." "Exactly," I said. I turned to Elias. I gave a small nod. Elias stepped forward. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Elias announced, his voice booming. "It is my distinct honor to finally introduce you to the chairwoman." He gestured to me with an open hand. "The founder, the majority shareholder, and the architect of Omnicorp Systems, Ms. Alexandra Layla Foxworth." The air left the room. Julian stopped breathing. He looked at Elias, waiting for the punchline. Then he looked at me. He looked at the suit, the watch, the way the security team was looking at me with reverence. The pieces fell into place. The late nights, working on data, the unexplained money in the household budget, the way I always knew when he was lying about business trips, the useless job that kept me on a laptop for 18 hours a day. His face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the table to stay upright. "No," he whispered. That is impossible. You are Layla. You drive a Honda." "I drive a Honda because I do not need a Mercedes to know who I am," I said. "And you drive a Mercedes paid for by my logistics department because you are empty inside." "You own the company," Victoria shrieked, her voice shattering the stunned silence. "You, the girl who buys her shoes at discount outlets, you own Omnicorp." "I own the building you are standing in," I said, turning my gaze to her. "I own the servers that process your emails. I own the shipping containers your husband uses to smuggle handbags. I own the expense account you used to buy that suit." "Victoria, technically, you are wearing my property." Victoria looked down at her clothes as if they were suddenly burning her skin. "This is a joke," Arthur stammered. "A prank. Julian, tell them it is a prank." "It is not a prank," Julian said, his voice hollow. He looked at me with a mixture of horror and a sudden, desperate calculation. You are the billionaire founder, the Phantom." "I am," I said. I stepped forward, moving into his personal space. "Now," I said, my voice dropping to a command that brooked no argument. "Get out of my chair." Julian looked at the chair. Then he looked at the security guards who had taken a step forward, their hands now resting on their stun batons. He moved. He stumbled to the side, nearly tripping over his own feet. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I stepped around him. I smoothed the back of the leather chair. I sat down. It fit perfectly. I placed my hands on the table, interlacing my fingers. I looked down the long expanse of mahogany at the faces of the people who had mocked me, belittled me, and stolen from me. "Good morning," I said, addressing the room. "I apologize for my absence over the last few years. I was busy conducting a very long, very thorough undercover inspection of my middle management, and I have to say, the findings are disappointing. Layla, Julian started, putting on a shaky smile, trying to pivot, trying to find an angle. Honey, listen, this is amazing. Why didn't you tell me? My God, we are a power couple. Imagine what we can do together. I mean, the merger with Vortex, with your capital and my vision. I held up one hand. Silence. There is no merger, I said. I spoke to the CEO of Vortex this morning. I informed him that the individuals negotiating the deal had no authority to sell my assets. He was displeased. He is currently being interviewed by the Securities and Exchange Commission about receiving stolen trade secrets. Julian's face crumbled. You called the SEC. I called everyone. Julian, I said. I called the FBI. I called the IRS. I called the forensic accountants. They have been in the building since 4 this morning. I tapped the leather folder on the table. This folder contains the evidence of 5 years of embezzlement, fraud, and corporate espionage. It details the $2 million you stole. Julian, the smuggling ring you ran. Arthur, the charity fraud you committed. Victoria, and the nepotism hire of your daughter who has not done a day of work in 3 years. Bella stopped chewing her gum. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. You can't prove any of that, Arthur blustered, though sweat was pouring down his face. We are executives. We have discretion. I have the logs, I said simply. I have the keystrokes. I have the recordings. I have the video of you, Julian, bragging about it in the library of the house that my company paid for. I have your signature on the prenuptial agreement where you claimed ownership of my assets, which constitutes sworn perjury and intent to defraud. I leaned forward. You called my job useless, I said, my voice cold and hard. You said I was a nobody. You said I should be a maid. Well, Julian, today I am doing exactly what a maid does. I am taking out the trash. Layla, please, Julian begged, his arrogance finally dissolving into pure terror. He reached for my hand across the table. We are family. We are getting married in 3 days. You cannot destroy your own husband. I looked at his hand, the hand that had held mine while he lied, the hand that had signed the order to sell my life's work. I did not pull away. I just looked at him with pity. We are not family, Julian, I said, and we are certainly not getting married. I opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward him. This is not a marriage license, I said. It is a termination notice, effective immediately, for cause, no severance, no benefits, no references. Julian stared at the paper. And one more thing, I added, looking at the entire family. The security team will escort you to your desks to collect your personal items. You have 10 minutes. Anything not in a box by 9:15 becomes the property of Omnicore, and do not bother trying to log in to delete anything. Your access was revoked 5 hours ago. You bitch, Victoria screamed, lunging forward. After everything we did for you, we gave you status. We gave you a name. Stone moved faster than I had ever seen a man of his size move. He stepped between me and Victoria, his presence a wall of muscle. Sit down, Stone barked. Victoria collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically. I stood up. The meeting is adjourned for the former management, I said. Security, please show the guests out. The real board has work to do, as the guards moved in to surround the Thorne family. Julian looked at me one last time. His eyes were wide, wet, and full of the realization of just how much he had lost. Who are you? He whispered. I am the data clerk, I said. And I just finished processing your file. You are deleted. The silence that followed my declaration of their termination was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pressurized, like the air inside a submarine dive chamber. For 10 long seconds, the only sound in the Omnicore executive boardroom was the hum of the hard drives in the server room, 3 floors below servers that I owned. Processing data that I controlled. Julian's face had drained of all color. He looked like a wax figure left out in the sun, his features melting from arrogance into a grotesque mask of disbelief. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, just a dry click of his throat closing up. It was Arthur Thorne who broke the silence first. His denial was loud, boisterous, and pathetic. "This is ridiculous," Arthur shouted, slamming his hand onto the table. Though the impact was weak, he looked around at the other board members, desperate for an ally. "Are you all going to sit there and listen to this? She is delusional. She is a data entry clerk having a psychotic break. She probably hacked the system to put her name on those slides. It is a prank. A sick, jealous prank." "Yes," Victoria chimed in, her voice shrill. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "You are a liar, Layla. You are a fraud. You are just trying to humiliate us because you know Julian is too good for you. You own this company. Please. You cannot even afford a brand new car. You buy your groceries with coupons." "It is a deep fake," Julian stammered, latching onto the excuse. "That is what it is. She used AI. She generated that voice. She manipulated the records. None of this is real." I watched them scramble, their reality fracturing under the weight of the truth. They were fighting for their lives, using the only weapons they had left: gaslighting and denial. "A deepfake," I repeated, my voice calm, cutting through their panic. I reached for the remote control on the table. "Let us see how good the AI is then. Shall we?" I pressed a button. The lights in the boardroom dimmed further, and the massive 90-inch screen at the head of the room flared to life. "Exhibit A," I announced, the screen filled with a video. It was grainy, taken from a hidden camera angle, but the picture was unmistakable. It was the interior of Julian's office. The timestamp was from yesterday afternoon. On the screen, Julian was sitting on my mahogany desk, laughing with Bella. The audio was crystal clear, captured by the transmitter I had hidden in the paper lunch bag. "She is so pathetic," Bella's voice echoed through the boardroom, magnified by the surround sound speakers. "Did you see her face? I made it myself. God, I cannot wait until you divorce her. Just a year." Julian's recorded voice replied, his tone dripping with disdain. "The prenup holds for a year. Once the sale goes through and the money is in the offshore accounts, I will file for irreconcilable differences. I will give her the apartment and the Honda." In the boardroom, the real Julian flinched as if he had been slapped. Bella covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. That is out of context," Julian whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Exhibit B," I continued. Pressing the button again, the screen changed. This time, it displayed a complex web of financial transactions. It was a forensic accounting map, tracing the flow of funds from Omnicore's accounts into the Thorne family's personal coffers. "Here we see the logistics budget," I narrated, pointing a laser pointer at the screen. "And here's the leak. $150,000 diverted to pay for a party in the Hamptons. $200,000 transferred to a shell company in the Cayman Islands registered to Arthur Thorne. $50,000 in consulting fees paid to Bella Thorne for a job that does not exist." I looked at Arthur. "Smuggling luxury goods in my shipping containers is a federal crime. Arthur, customs evasion, wire fraud, the evidence is right there. Every container number, every falsified manifest, every bribe you paid to the dock foreman. I have it all." Arthur slumped in his chair, his bluster evaporating instantly. He looked at the screen, seeing his prison sentence laid out in high-definition spreadsheets. "And finally," I said, "Exhibit C." The screen shifted to a video from the St. Regis Hotel hallway, taken last night. It showed Julian stumbling out of his room, half naked, screaming at his mistress. "Deepfakes do not come with metadata." "Julian," I said, "this video is time-stamped and geotagged, and the woman in the room that is your secretary, isn't it the one on the payroll as an executive assistant?" The boardroom was dead silent. The legitimate board members looked at the Thorns with absolute disgust. Mr. Henderson was shaking his head, writing furiously in his notebook. My job, I said, stepping closer to the table, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The job you called useless. The job you mocked at every dinner party. The job you told your friends was data entry. What did you think I was entering? Julian. I leaned my hands on the table, looming over him. I was not entering data. I was capturing it. For 3 years, my useless job was to be the invisible eye in this room. My job was to watch you steal from me. My job was to document every penny you siphoned off, every lie you told, and every plan you made to destroy my legacy. Layla, Julian choked out. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't look, I countered. You were too busy looking in the mirror. I straightened up, smoothing my jacket. But firing you is too easy, I said. Taking away your jobs, that is just the appetizer. You see, when I realized what you were doing, I decided to diversify my portfolio. I signaled to Elias. He handed me another stack of documents. These were not Omnicore papers. These were bank documents. You live a very expensive lifestyle, Julian, I observed, flipping through the papers. The cars, the watches, the trips. You spent money you didn't have, counting on the sale of my company to pay it back. You are leveraged to the hilt. So what? Julian said, trying to find a shred of defiance. I have lines of credit. Not anymore, I smiled, a cold, sharp expression. You see, debt is a commodity. It can be bought and sold, and last week, through a series of very quiet, very legal transactions, a holding company called Nemesis LLC purchased all of your personal debt from your various creditors. I dropped the papers in front of him. I bought your mortgage, Arthur. I bought your car loans, Julian. I bought your credit card debt, Victoria. I even bought the student loans you ignored, Bella. Their faces went from pale to a sickly gray. I am not just your boss, I said. I am your creditor, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, Nemesis LLC has called in the loans. You are in default, which means I can and I will foreclose on everything. The house in the Hamptons mine. The Mercedes in the parking lot. Mine. The clothes on your back. Likely mine too, once the interest is calculated. You cannot do that, Victoria shrieked. That is our home. You are stealing our lives. I am repossessing my assets, I corrected her. Julian looked at the papers, his hands trembling so hard he could barely hold them. He looked at the ruin of his life, the career gone, the reputation destroyed, the fortune vanished, and now, the debt. He looked up at me, and his eyes changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, manipulative pleading. He stood up slowly, holding his hands out in a gesture of surrender. Layla, he said, his voice soft, trembling with fake emotion. Baby, listen to me. Okay, I messed up. I made mistakes. Big mistakes. But think about what you are doing. We are us. We are a team. He took a step toward me. I did this for us. He lied. Tears welling in his eyes. I wanted to be a big man for you. I wanted to give you the world. I got lost. Okay, I got greedy. But I love you. We are getting married in 3 days. Do not throw away our future over money. We can fix this. You run the company. I will support you. Just do not destroy us. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If I had been the woman I was 5 years ago, maybe I would have hesitated. But I was not that woman. I looked at him with the clinical detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. For us? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You were selling the research and development division, my life's work, to my competitor behind my back. You were going to gut this company and leave me with a hollow shell. I picked up the remote and rewound the video of him in the office. I played the clip again. Once the sale goes through, I will file for irreconcilable differences. I will give her the apartment and the Honda. Is that the future you are talking about, Julian? I asked. The one where you sell my company. Take the cash and dump me with a used car." "I didn't mean it," Julian cried. "It was just talk, locker room talk." "It was a plan," I said. "And it failed." "You betch," Victoria screamed. The explosion was sudden. Victoria Thorne, the woman who prided herself on elegance and high society manners, lunged across the table. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, animalistic rage. She grabbed a heavy crystal glass and hurled it at my head. "You ungrateful little brat," she shrieked, clawing at the air, trying to reach me. "I will kill you. You ruined my son. You ruined everything." I did not flinch. I did not move. Stone intercepted the glass in midair with a gloved hand, shattering it harmlessly against his palm, in the same motion. He grabbed Victoria by the arm and pinned her against the wall. "Let me go," she screamed, kicking and thrashing. "Do you know who I am? I am a thorn." "You are a liability," Stone said, his voice like granite. He handcuffed her wrists behind her back efficiently. "Get your hands off my mother," Julian shouted, moving to help her. Two other security guards stepped forward, blocking his path. They did not draw weapons. Their size alone was enough. Julian stopped, chest heaving, realizing he was physically powerless. "Sit down, Julian," I commanded. "Before you join her in cuffs right now instead of waiting for the police." Julian collapsed back into his chair. Putting his head in his hands, I turned back to the table. The adrenaline was humming in my veins, but my voice remained steady. "It is over," I said. I looked at Elias. "Execute the protocol," I ordered. Elias nodded and spoke into his headset. Now, the doors to the boardroom opened again, and a team of junior IT technicians walked in, carrying plastic bins. They moved with swift, silent efficiency. "What is this?" Bella asked, clutching her purse. "Confiscation," I said. I pointed to Julian. "Badge, phone, laptop, company credit cards, key fob to the car, watch." "My watch." Julian looked up, horrified. "This was a gift. Bought with a bonus check from the quarter you falsified the earnings report." I said, "It is proceeds of crime. Hand it over." One of the technicians stepped up to Julian holding a bin. Julian hesitated, looking at me with hatred, but he slowly unclasped the Rolex. He dropped it into the bin. Clunk. Next, he handed over his phone, then his badge, the badge that said Regional Director. "You too." "Arthur," I said. "And Bella? Everything?" Arthur handed over his phone with shaking hands. "My contacts. My whole life is in there." "Your life is property of the FBI now," I said. "They will be very interested in your contacts." Bella was crying now. Silent mascara stained tears. She dropped her phone into the bin as if it were a piece of her soul. "My social media logins are on there," she whimpered. "I think your followers will survive without your brunch updates for a few years," I said coldly. I watched as they were stripped. They were stripped of their technology, their status symbols, their access, and their dignity, without the badges, without the phones, without the expensive watches. They looked small. They looked like ordinary people who had made terrible choices. "Layla," Julian said, his voice broken. He was stripped down to just his suit, staring at the empty table. "Please, what are we supposed to do? You froze our accounts. You took our cars. How do we even get home?" "The subway station is 2 blocks away," I said. "A single ride is $2.90. I assume you have some loose change in your pockets. If not, maybe you can ask a stranger for help. It builds character." I turned to the board, turning my back on the thorns. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said to the remaining members, my tone shifting back to professional calm. "I apologize for the theater, but it was necessary to excise the infection completely. Now, we have a company to run. I have a reorganization plan to present." "Wait," Julian shouted, standing up one last time. "You cannot just ignore me. I was the face of this company. The stock will tank without me." I stopped. I turned my head slowly to look at him over my shoulder. "The stock is up 4% since the market opened 9 minutes ago," I said. The market loves a cleanup. Julian, you were not the face of the company. You were just a mask. And I just took it off. I gestured to Stone. Get them out of my building. As the security guards hauled Victoria, still screaming, and guided a weeping Arthur and a broken Julian toward the exit. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not joy. It was not happiness. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, carried for years, finally being set down. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing the silence in the room once more. I looked at the empty chairs they had left behind. Now, I said, sitting down at the head of the table and opening my laptop, the real one. Let us get to work. The double doors of the boardroom did not lead to freedom. As Stone and his security team escorted the Thorne family into the wide corridor, lined with expensive abstract art and floor-to-ceiling glass, they were met not by the elevator call button, but by a wall of navy blue windbreakers. The logo on the jackets was discreet but unmistakable. 3 letters in yellow, FBI. Behind them stood officers from the NYPD, Economic Crimes Unit, and 2 men in dark suits who I recognized immediately as federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York. The procession stopped abruptly. Julian, who had been muttering threats about lawsuits and wrongful termination, went silent. It was the silence of a man who sees the executioner's axe and realizes the time for bargaining has passed. A tall woman with a badge on her belt stepped forward. Special Agent Miller. I had been coordinating with her office for 3 weeks, feeding her the forensic data Elias had compiled. Arthur Thorne, Agent Miller asked, her voice flat and professional. Arthur tried to straighten his spine, attempting to summon the bluster that had served him for decades. I am Arthur Thorne, and I demand to know why federal agents are harassing private citizens in a place of business. I will have your badge for this. Arthur Thorne, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, tax evasion, and international smuggling, Agent Miller recited, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from her belt. We have seized the shipping manifests from the port of Newark confirming the transport of undeclared luxury goods in Omnicore containers. We also have your signature on the customs declarations. Arthur's face turned a shade of gray that matched the carpet. It was a clerical error, he stammered as the agent spun him around. My assistant handles the paperwork. You cannot pin this on me. We have the audio recordings of you ordering the mislabeling. Mr. Thorne, Agent Miller said, ratcheting the cuffs tight. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. Next, the officers moved to Victoria. She looked at them with pure, unadulterated snobbery, as if they were staff who had brought her the wrong wine. Do not touch me, she hissed, as a female officer approached. This is a misunderstanding. I am a philanthropist. I run charities. You are under arrest for embezzlement and charity fraud, the officer said, snapping the cuffs on Victoria's wrists. Using a 501c3 organization to launder money for personal shopping expenses is a felony. Mrs. Thorne, we have the receipts from Bergdorf Goodman matching the withdrawal dates from the Save the Children Fund. Victoria let out a wail that sounded less like a human cry and more like a wounded animal. Then, they turned to Julian. He was standing there in his suit, minus the watch and phone I had confiscated. He looked at Agent Miller. Then he looked back at me standing in the doorway of the boardroom. Layla, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Tell them this is an internal matter. We can handle this in-house. I will pay it back. I swear. Just call them off. I walked slowly toward him. I stopped just outside of his reach. It is not an internal matter. Julian, I said calmly, it is a federal crime. You sold proprietary technology to a competitor. That is corporate espionage. You falsified earnings reports to boost your bonus. That is securities fraud. And you stole directly from the operational budget. That is grand larceny. I am your fiancé, he shouted as the agents grabbed his arms. You cannot send your husband to prison. I am not your wife, I reminded him. And you are not my husband. I signaled Elias, who handed me a copy of the document we had discussed in the library just a week ago. Regarding the prenuptial agreement, I said, holding the paper up so he could see his own signature. You were very insistent that we protect our assets. Julian, you wanted to make sure that what was yours remained yours. I signed it, Julian cried. It protects me. Actually, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. It condemns you. In this document, you listed the Hamptons estate, the yacht, and the offshore accounts as your personal property. Since those assets were purchased with stolen funds, this document is a sworn confession of money laundering. You claimed ownership of the proceeds of crime. I took a step closer, lowering my voice so the venom could sink in. And there is one more thing. Because I never married you, the spousal protections do not apply. However, you did sign an employment contract with Omnicore 5 years ago. That contract has a very strict non-disclosure agreement and a fiduciary duty clause. By selling secrets to Vortex, you violated that contract. So fire me, Julian spat. You already did. Oh, it goes beyond firing, I corrected him. Because you violated the contract. I am suing you for breach of duty. I am suing you for the damages to the company reputation. And since you have no job and no income, I am exercising the lien clause. I looked at the terrified family. I am seizing everything, I said. The furniture in your mother's house, the jewelry in your safe deposit box, the remaining balance in your retirement accounts. I am taking it all as restitution. By the time the lawyers are done, you will not just be in prison, you will be destitute. You can't do that, Julian screamed, struggling against the agents. That is my money, I earned it. You stole it, I said, and I am taking it back. Take them away, Agent Miller ordered. The procession moved toward the elevators. I followed, flanked by Stone and Elias. I wanted to see this through to the end. I wanted to see them leave my building not as kings, but as prisoners. We rode the freight elevator down, the silence broken only by Victoria's sobbing and the metallic rattle of the handcuffs. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the lobby was not empty. During the board meeting, Elias had sent out a notification, a mandatory all-hands announcement in the main atrium. 300 employees were gathered in the lobby. They stood in silence, watching the elevator doors. These were the people Julian had terrorized, the assistants he had screamed at, the junior managers he had blamed for his mistakes, the support staff he had treated like furniture. They saw the FBI jackets first, then they saw Arthur, Victoria, and finally Julian, led out in irons. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Julian looked up. He saw the faces of the people he had bullied. He saw Tiffany, the receptionist, standing behind her desk, her hand over her mouth. He saw the janitorial staff he had mocked. He tried to look away, to hide his face, but there was nowhere to hide. This was his stage, and for the first time, he was playing the villain without a mask. Bella, who was walking behind them, not handcuffed but flanked by a police officer for questioning, spotted me stepping out of the elevator. She broke away from the officer, rushing toward me with tears streaming down her face. "Layla!" she cried, grabbing my arm before Stone could intercept her. "Layla, please, you have to stop this. They are taking Daddy. They are taking Julian." I looked down at her. Her mascara was running, ruining the perfect face she presented to social media. "It is out of my hands, Bella," I said unmoved. "The law is the law." "But we are family," she wailed, clutching my sleeve. "I know we were mean. I know we made jokes, but you were going to be my sister. You cannot let them go to jail. We are family. Family forgives. Please, Layla, just make a call. You have the money. You can fix this." I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my jacket. I smoothed the fabric where she had touched it. "You are right, Bella," I said, my voice carrying over the silent lobby. "Family is important. My father taught me that." I looked at Julian, who was watching us with a desperate hope in his eyes. "But my father also taught me something else," I said. "Family does not steal from you. Family does not mock you. And family certainly does not stab you in the back for a profit margin." I stepped back. "I am not your family. I said. "I am your employer, and you are trespassing." The officer gently took Bella by the arm and led her away. She was sobbing, her cries echoing off the marble walls as the revolving doors swallowed the Thorne family, taking them out to the waiting squad cars. A heavy silence hung over the lobby. The employees looked at me. They were uncertain. They had just seen the tyrant fall, but they did not know what kind of ruler had taken his place. They saw the data girl standing in a power suit, flanked by federal agents. I looked around the room. I saw fear in some eyes, uncertainty in others. I needed to fix this. "Elias," I said softly. "Is he here?" "Yes, ma'am," Elias said. "Over by the security desk." I walked toward the center of the lobby. I stood on the Omnicore seal inlaid in the floor. "Can I have your attention, please?" I said. My voice was not shouted, but in the acoustic perfection of the lobby. It reached everyone. "My name is Alexandra Layla Foxworth," I announced. "For those of you who do not know me, I am the founder of this company. For those of you who do know me, you probably know me as the woman who sat quietly in the corner while the former management treated this building like their personal playground." There were a few nervous chuckles. "I know the last few years have been difficult," I continued. "I know there was a culture of fear here. I know good people were fired for bad reasons. I know credit was stolen and hard work was ignored." I paused, making eye contact with the crowd. "That ends today." I turned toward the security desk. "Mr. Marcus Henderson," I called out. "Please come forward." The crowd parted. Marcus, the compliance officer who had been fired just yesterday for refusing to sign the fraudulent reports, stepped forward. He looked bewildered. He was wearing his weekend clothes, clutching the business card I had given him in the elevator. He walked into the circle, looking at me with wide eyes. "Yesterday," I said, addressing the room but looking at Marcus. "This man was fired by Julian Thorne because he refused to break the law. He lost his pension and his livelihood because he had integrity, because he chose to do what was right instead of what was easy." I reached out and shook Marcus's hand. "I cannot undo the stress of the last 24 hours, Marcus," I said, "but I can offer you a new position." I turned back to the crowd. "Effective immediately, Marcus Henderson is the new Global Director of Human Resources," I announced. "His first task will be to review every termination from the last 3 years, if you were let go unfairly, or if you know someone who was. We want you back." For a second, there was silence. Then, one person started clapping. It was Tiffany at the reception desk, then another, then the security guards. Within seconds, the lobby erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a roar. It was the sound of 300 people realizing that the reign of terror was over. People were cheering. Some were crying. Marcus stood there, stunned, tears streaming down his face as his former colleagues rushed to shake his hand. I stepped back, letting Marcus have his moment. I walked toward the glass doors of the entrance. Outside, the flashing lights of the police cruisers were reflecting off the wet pavement. I watched as Julian was guided into the back of a black SUV. He looked back at the building one last time. He saw the celebration inside. He saw the people he had deemed useless, cheering for his downfall. Our eyes met through the glass. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel hate. I felt a profound, weightless sense of relief. The parasite had been removed. The host could finally heal. I watched the caravan of police vehicles pull away, merging into the traffic of the city. They were heading to the federal courthouse for arraignment, then to a holding cell. Julian's life of luxury was over. He would trade his silk sheets for a steel cot and his champagne for prison water. "Ma'am," I turned. Elias was standing beside me, holding a tablet. "The press is already calling," he said. "The stock price just jumped another 6%. The market likes the news of the corruption purge. They are calling it a bold move for transparency. Let them talk," I said. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow. But for today, order lunch for the whole building. The good stuff, not the cheap catering Julian used." "Yes, ma'am." Elias smiled. Anything else? Yes, I said, looking back at the empty elevator that had taken the thorns away. Cancel my wedding planner. I think I'm going to be busy. I turned my back on the street and walked back into the warmth of my building. The applause was dying down, replaced by the energetic hum of people getting back to work not out of fear, but out of hope. I took the elevator back up to the penthouse office, alone. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. The beige cardigan was a memory. The submissive fiancé was a ghost. Layla Foxworth was back, and she had a company to run. 6 months had passed since the day I walked into the boardroom and detonated the life I had known. The seasons had changed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Omnicore penthouse suite. The gray slush of winter had given way to the vibrant, relentless green of spring. It was a fitting metaphor for the company itself. Under the previous management, Omnicore had been a bloated, decaying beast, rotting from the inside out with corruption and nepotism. Now, it was lean, hungry, and alive. I stood at the window looking down at the city of New York. From this height, the cars looked like toys, and the people were invisible specks of dust. I took a sip of my morning coffee. It was black, simple, and purchased from the cart on the corner, not the $400 espresso machine Julian had insisted on installing in the break room. Ms. Foxworth. I turned. Elias was standing in the doorway holding a tablet. He looked different, too. The perpetual furrow of worry that used to etch his forehead was gone, replaced by the energetic focus of a man who loved his job. The meeting with Vortex Corp is starting in 5 minutes, Elias said. Silas Sterling is sweating through his suit. I think he knows what is coming. Let him sweat, I said, walking back to my desk. It is good for the pores. I walked into the conference room not with the aggressive stomp of a conqueror, but with the quiet assurance of an owner. Silas Sterling, the CEO of Vortex Corp., the man who had flicked the lapel of my trench coat and called me a servant at the gala, was sitting at the table. He looked 20 years older than he had that night. His stock price had plummeted after the SEC investigation revealed his company had been knowingly accepting stolen trade secrets from Julian. He was bleeding cash. His investors were fleeing, and he was desperate. He stood up when I entered, extending a hand that trembled slightly. Layla, he said, forcing a smile that looked painful. Or should I say, Ms. Foxworth. It is good to see you again. I did not take his hand. I sat down at the head of the table and opened a thin folder. Sit down, Silas, I said. We do not have much time. I have a lunch reservation. Silas sank back into his chair. Look, Layla, I know we got off on the wrong foot. The gala. That was a misunderstanding. I had no idea who you were. You knew I was a human being, I said simply. And you treated me like furniture. That tells me everything I need to know about your leadership style. But I am not here to discuss manners. I am here to discuss the acquisition. Right, Silas nodded, shuffling his papers. We are prepared to accept a buyout at $30 a share. It is a fair market value considering our intellectual property. I laughed. It was a genuine, amused sound. $30? I asked. Silas, your intellectual property consists of stolen code from my servers and a logistics network that is currently being audited by the federal government. Your brand is toxic. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. $3 a share, I said, and a complete liquidation of the executive board. You step down today, no golden parachute, no severance. Silas stared at the paper, his face turning a blotchy red. This is an insult. This is a hostile takeover. It is a rescue mission, I corrected him. If you do not sign, I walk away. And when the fines from the antitrust lawsuit hit next month, Vortex will file for bankruptcy. Your shares will be worth $0. I am offering you a lifeboat. Silas, it is a small, leaky lifeboat, but it is better than drowning. He looked at me with hate, but behind the hate was defeat. He remembered the woman in the beige coat he had mocked. He realized too late that he had kicked a wolf thinking it was a dog. You are enjoying this, he whispered. I am doing business, I replied. Sign the paper? He signed. 10 minutes later, I owned his company. I had bought my biggest competitor for the price of a used sedan. As Silas walked out of the room, stripped of his company and his pride, I felt a sense of closure. The circle was complete. I went back to my office where Elias was waiting with the weekly briefing. This was my favorite part of the week. It was not just about profits, it was about people. How are the numbers, I asked. Up 12% across the board, Elias reported. But more importantly, the employee retention rate is at 98%. The new Foxworth grant for employee education has already approved 50 applications. People are happy, Layla. They feel safe. And Marcus? I asked. Marcus is doing an incredible job as HR director. Elias smiled. He just implemented a blind hiring policy to prevent bias. He said it was the best way to ensure we never have another Bella Thorne situation. Good, I nodded. Speaking of the Thorns, Elias said, his tone shifting slightly. I have the update you requested from the legal team. I spun my chair around to face the window again. Go ahead. Arthur Thorne was sentenced yesterday, Elias said. 5 years in federal prison for customs fraud and smuggling. The judge wanted to make an example of him. He is being transferred to a medium security facility in Pennsylvania tomorrow. And Victoria. She avoided jail time by turning state's evidence against her husband, Elias said. But the civil suits wiped her out. The Hamptons house was sold to pay the restitution to Omnicorp. The yacht is gone. She is currently living in a studio apartment in New Jersey. She is working at a makeup counter in a department store. I allowed myself a small smile. The woman who had sneered at my clothes was now spending her days serving customers who likely treated her with the same disdain she had shown me. And Julian, I asked. The name no longer caused a spike in my heart rate. It was just a word. Julian is struggling, Elias said. His bankruptcy filing was finalized last week. He has 0 assets. Because of the fraud conviction, he is barred from holding any executive position in a publicly traded company. No reputable firm will hire him. So where is he? He is working for a moving company in Queens, Elias said. Physical labor, lifting boxes, loading trucks. Apparently, his back is giving him trouble. The irony, I mused. He used to pretend to run a logistics empire. Now he is the one carrying the boxes. He tried to email you again, Elias added gently. Yesterday, from a new address. Read it, I said. Elias tapped his screen. Subject, I am sorry. Body Layla. Please, I am sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I cannot do this anymore. I know I messed up, but I miss you. I miss us. Can we just talk? I just want to hear your voice. Please. I listened to the words. They were pathetic. They were the words of a man who missed his comfort. Not his partner. He did not miss me. He missed the penthouse. He missed the credit cards. He missed the feeling of being important. Block it, I said. Already done, Elias replied. Do you want me to send a cease and desist? No, I said, standing up. Silence is louder. Let him scream into the void. He does not exist in my world anymore. Elias nodded and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I was alone. I walked over to the small recycling bin in the corner of the room. I opened the top drawer of my desk, in the back. Tucked away in a small velvet box was the engagement ring. It was a beautiful ring objectively, 5 carats, flawless clarity, but when I looked at it, I did not see beauty. I saw a bribe. I saw a shackle. I saw a symbol of a promise that had been a lie from the very beginning. I took the ring out of the box. The diamond caught the sunlight, fracturing it into 1,000 rainbows. For a long time, I had held on to it, thinking I might sell it and donate the money to charity. But even that felt like keeping a connection. It felt like giving Julian's lies a value. I realized then that I did not want the money. I did not want the memory. I wanted to be free of the weight. I walked to the recycling bin. Trash, I whispered. I dropped the ring. It hit the bottom of the metal bin with a hollow clink. It landed on top of a stack of shredded paper and an empty coffee cup. It was just carbon, just a rock. It had no power over me. I walked back to the window. The city stretched out before me, vast and full of possibility. 6 months ago, I was a woman hiding in a beige cardigan, afraid to speak, afraid to shine, dimming my own light to make a small man feel big. Now, I was the sun. I thought about the journey. I thought about the pain of betrayal, the sting of humiliation, the cold nights spent plotting in my secret room. People often said that revenge was a hollow victory. They said it would not bring you happiness. They were wrong. Revenge, when executed with justice and precision, was not about causing pain. It was about restoring balance. It was about taking back the power that had been stolen. It was about proving to yourself that you were not a victim, but a survivor. I had destroyed the Thorne family. Yes, but in doing so, I had saved 1,000 jobs. I had reinstated good people. I had created a company that stood for something. Success is the sweetest revenge, they say. But I realized as I looked at my reflection in the glass that living happily, living authentically, living without fear, that was the ultimate victory. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus. Meeting with the new AI development team in 10 minutes. They have some ideas for the drone project. They are really excited to present to you. I smiled. The future was waiting. I grabbed my jacket, a sharp, electric blue blazer that fit me perfectly, and headed for the door. I walked out of my office, past the assistants who smiled and waved, past the wall of patents that bore my name. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. As the doors slid open, I stepped inside. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall one last time. There was no sadness in my eyes, no regret, just the bright, fierce look of a woman who had walked through the fire and come out made of gold. The doors closed, and I began to rise. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and the ultimate corporate comeback. I hope you enjoyed Layla's journey from the useless fiancé to the queen of her own empire. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Are you tuning in from your office, your car, or maybe relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the Scarlet Revenge Stories channel, hitting that like button, and smashing the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep bringing you the best revenge stories on the internet. Stay strong, and remember, success is the best revenge.